Ever watch the market take a sudden, terrifying nosedive? Yeah, me too. It gives you this massive knot in your stomach. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tackling our absolute deepest financial fear, a complete, systemic wipeout of the markets. It's that chilling thought in the back of every investor's mind. What if it all just goes away?
So let's dive right into this ultimate existential dread. Honestly, it's an anxiety that almost every single investor has wrestled with during moments of sheer market panic. You watch those red arrows ticking downward. The news headlines are literally screaming about impending doom. And you just can't help but wonder, is this the big one? Will the global financial market actually completely collapse to absolute zero, wiping out everything forever?
In this explainer, we're going to demystify this doomsday scenario. We'll be covering 1. Will the market hit zero? 2. The 3 pillars of the system. 3. Localized wipeout risks. 4. The paradox of bailouts. 5. The limits of currency. And finally, 6. Survival lessons.
All right, Section 1, will the market hit zero? Systematic collapse. Let's start with the elephant in the room and answer our big question head on. Here is the genuinely reassuring reality. To give you the most honest answer, a complete, permanent collapse where all assets drop to zero is extremely unlikely. Actually, it's practically impossible, unless it's accompanied by the total collapse of human civilization itself. Sure, severe, prolonged crises absolutely happen. We've seen them. But a true descent to zero, the very structure of our world, prevents it.
Moving on to Section 2, system pillars and their built-in defenses.
You see, there are 3 main pillars that basically form an invisible shield around the global economy. First up, we have real assets. Behind all those blinking stock tickers on your screen are actual companies with physical land, factories, technology, and real people. They produce essential goods, food, medicine, energy. Even in peak panic, human beings still need to eat. They need medicine, they need to turn on the lights, right? That intrinsic demand creates a solid floor for value. Second, we've got central banks. Since the Great Depression back in 1929, the rules of the game have entirely changed. Institutions like the Federal Reserve hold the ultimate trump card, which is the power to print money. When facing the abyss, kind of like we saw in 2008 or the 2020 pandemic, they will relentlessly pump astronomical liquidity into the system just to keep it breathing. They might not be able to prevent a recession, but they will absolutely stop a total collapse. And third, circuit breakers. Modern exchanges are equipped with automatic tripwires. If prices plunge too fast, trading is literally halted. It forces a timeout and stops blind, emotional panic from spiraling into a systemic heart attack.
But just as you start to relax, we kind of need to pivot, because while the overarching system surviving is great news, it definitely doesn't mean your personal portfolio is safe. That brings us to Section 3, wipeout risks and localized danger.
So the crucial point here is visualizing this brutal reality. Look at this number, 78%. That is how much the Nasdaq lost during the dot-com bubble burst back in the year 2000. Now, while the system itself didn't go to zero, if you personally lost nearly 80% of your wealth, it essentially felt like a total collapse, didn't it? It took individual investors 10 to 15 agonizing years just to break even after that staggering loss.
And, well, we saw it again. The S&P 500 lost over half its value during the 2008 financial crisis. For an everyday investor who is watching their life savings get cut in half, the technical distinction between a market correction and a total collapse is entirely meaningless. To them, their financial world did crash.
This brilliantly illustrates the massive divide between the macro system and micro assets. The general market, it absorbs those massive shocks and historically recovers over time. But individual companies, they can and frequently do go to absolute zero. Think of titans like Lehman Brothers, Enron, or countless speculative crypto projects that just completely vanished. The system as a whole is bulletproof. The individual components inside it absolutely are not.
Add to this the ever-present threat of black swan events. You know, those highly unpredictable, incredibly rare shocks that totally blindside the market. A sudden global pandemic, large-scale warfare disrupting global supply lines, or a massive cyber attack that physically paralyzes our trading infrastructure. These events might not permanently destroy the market, but they can instantly freeze it in its tracks, creating agonizing periods of localized destruction. To truly wrap our heads around this cycle, it's helpful to think of the financial system like a giant forest. Periodic crises, they're basically forest fires. Yes, they are intensely painful in the short term, but they actually serve a necessary evolutionary purpose. They burn away the dead wood, the weak companies, the bad debt. The forest as a whole never dies. Instead, the ashes fertilize the ground so a healthier cycle of new growth can happen. The problem is, humanity really doesn't like letting fires burn. And this brings us to Section 4, the paradox of bailouts and the cost of rescues.
The main justification for these massive government interventions is the concept of too big to fail. Our modern financial institutions are just so deeply interconnected across the globe that if one massive link in the chain snaps, it triggers a catastrophic domino effect. It would freeze global credit and literally paralyze the real economy. Businesses wouldn't be able to make payroll. Everyday citizens couldn't access their bank accounts. Because governments simply cannot allow this nightmare to unfold, they are essentially forced to establish a precedent of unlimited intervention. They basically throw a permanent safety net beneath massive and sometimes frankly reckless institutions.
But here's the catch. Bailouts aren't magic tricks that just make risk disappear. They simply transfer it. They take the risk from the balance sheets of massive financial institutions and drop it directly onto the backs of everyday people. How? First, through inflation. When central banks pump massive liquidity, they dilute the currency, and ordinary citizens pay the price through the erosion of their purchasing power. Second, moral hazard. If massive institutions know they'll be rescued, they take bigger, more reckless risks, which threatens our future financial stability. And finally, public debt. The astronomical cost of these rescues becomes sovereign debt, which falls squarely on the nation's taxpayers.
This dynamic of just printing money brings us to a really terrifying boundary condition. Section 5, the limits of currency and physical crises.
What happens when the next massive crisis isn't just a spreadsheet problem you can throw digital money at?
Ask yourself this fundamental question. Can printing trillions of dollars instantly create a barrel of oil, a grain of wheat, or a vital microchip? No, absolutely not. This hits at the terrifying reality of physical crises. If a severe climate disaster destroys global crop yields, or a major war completely severs our energy supply chains, the primary weapon of central banks, the money printer, becomes completely useless. You literally cannot print physical matter.
In fact, if central banks attempt to cure a real-world material shortage simply by flooding the market with more printed currency, the guaranteed result isn't a rescue. It's an acceleration toward disaster. It leads directly to hyperinflation or the highly dreaded scenario known as stagflation. That is where you have a stagnant, dying, recessionary economy colliding violently with sky-high runaway inflation. It's the worst of both worlds.
So knowing all this, knowing that the overarching system will survive, but your individual assets might not, and that government rescues ultimately come at your expense, how do you protect yourself? Section 6, Survival Lessons to Protect Your Wealth.
Your absolute best defense here is a proactive, disciplined strategy. First, you must manage your risk actively. Please do not expect the market to do it for you. Second, never use excessive leverage or debt. Debt is exactly what forces you into bankruptcy before the market even has a chance to recover. Third, diversify. It's the oldest rule in the book for a reason. Never put all your eggs in one fragile basket. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, anchor a portion of your wealth in assets that hold real intrinsic value. We're talking about tangible things like land, gold, or shares in high-quality businesses that actually produce real-world necessities.
It is so absolutely vital to internalize this reality. Bailouts do not cure the financial disease. They merely act as a mechanism to shift the massive burden of institutional failure directly onto you through the silent thieves of inflation and compounding public debt. Remember this the next time you see breaking news of a massive financial rescue. You, the taxpayer, are the one ultimately footing the bill.
Which leaves us with one final, crucial thought to ponder. The financial system is incredibly resilient. It will unequivocally step in to save itself, but it will do so by transferring the systemic risk directly onto your shoulders. So take a close look at your own portfolio today. Ask yourself, are your assets real enough and is your strategy resilient enough to actually survive the system's next big rescue? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, stay curious and stay focused.